Billionaire tests 4 women with 4 black cards. And what the maid bought made him shame for looking down on her. Hello. Everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us get back to our main character. It all began on a bright Monday morning in downtown Chicago. Inside the glass tower of Grant Enterprises, billionaire Alexander Grant stared at the skyline with that usual mix of power and boredom. To the world, he was a genius investor, a self-made man who turned every risk into gold. But inside, Alexander had grown cold and cynical, especially toward women. After a bitter divorce that made headlines and cost him more pride than money, he convinced himself that every woman had a price tag. That morning, surrounded by his executive team, he said something that made the entire room freeze. "I am done with dating games," he said, sliding a sleek black credit card across the table. "In fact, I will give 4 women 4 of these cards. Each gets 24 hours to spend however she wants. I just want to see what they truly desire." The men in the room chuckled awkwardly. His assistant Mason raised a brow. "Sir, is this another social experiment?" Alexander smiled faintly. "No, Mason. It is the fastest way to know who is real." Later that day, in the grand marble lobby of his penthouse, 4 women stood before him. 3 of them looked exactly how you would expect a model draped in designer silk, an influencer in glittering heels, and a corporate heiress, with diamonds heavy enough to fund a small island. And then there was Lila, the quiet housemaid who was still holding a mop when her name was called. "Me. There must be a mistake," she whispered. Alexander leaned back, amused. "No mistake. You live in my house, you see everything. Let us see how you spend when money means nothing." Lila hesitated, clutching the black card like it might burn her fingers. The other women giggled. "Oh, come on," the model sneered. "She probably thinks a black card is a bus pass." Lila's cheeks turned pink, but she smiled politely and said, "Maybe I will buy cleaning supplies." The room burst into laughter. Even Alexander smirked, though something about her tone, gentle, not bitter, made him pause for half a second. The next morning, the test began. Security cameras followed each woman as they left the mansion. The model rushed to Michigan Avenue Arms, full of shopping bags, before noon. The influencer went live on social media shouting #blessed as she ordered champagne towers and luxury handbags. The heiress rented an entire spa for herself, and her friends tipping extravagantly just to be seen. And Lila? She took a city bus across town to a thrift store, then to a small orphanage on the south side. With that same card, she bought toys, warm blankets, and cartons of milk. When the cashier asked, "Is this for a fundraiser?" she answered with a grin, "No, it is just for home. For kids who deserve one." Back at the mansion, Alexander watched the footage in silence, his expression unreadable, his fingers tapping against the glass table. "Mason," whispered, "Sir, do you want to stop recording?" Alexander shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he murmured. "Let us see what the maid buys next." And none of them could imagine that this tiny act of kindness would soon turn the billionaire's cruel little game into the lesson of his life. Alexander had always believed that money was the ultimate truth-teller. If you wanted to know someone's soul, just give them unlimited power and watch what they did with it. That belief was his armor. It kept him from getting hurt again. But that afternoon, as he re-watched the security footage of Lila stepping off the bus with her worn-out sneakers and that innocent smile, something strange stirred inside him. She was not rushing into a luxury store like the others. She was standing in front of a thrift shop, carefully counting prices, then walking out with bags full of blankets and toys. He frowned. "What is she doing?" he murmured. Mason leaned closer. "Sir, she spent less than $200 so far. That is very unusual." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Let her finish. I want to see it through." The next frame showed her arriving at an old building with a faded sign, Street Agnes Orphanage. The camera followed her into a small room where a dozen children ran to greet her, squealing with laughter. She knelt down, unpacking the toys and the milk cartons one by one, her face glowing with joy. The sound of her laughter through the surveillance audio made something in Alexander's chest tighten, a feeling he could not name. Back at the mansion that evening, the three other women returned, first showing off what they had bought. The model displayed her designer bags on the marble floor like trophies. The influencer demanded champagne to celebrate. The heiress bragged that she had spent exactly the card's limit for precision and class. Lila came last, her hands empty, except for a folded receipt. Alexander raised an eyebrow. No shopping bags. She smiled nervously. I did shop, Mr. Grant. I just gave everything away. The room went silent for a moment, before the influencer snorted. You gave away a billionaire's money? That is adorable. Lila lowered her gaze. Children needed it more than I did. Alexander's mouth curved into a faint, unreadable smile. Well, Miss Lila, he said, I suppose generosity is one kind of intelligence. The women around them laughed, thinking he was being sarcastic. Lila just nodded softly and left the room, unaware that he kept watching her long after she disappeared down the hall. That night, Alexander sat alone by the fireplace, swirling a glass of bourbon. For the first time in years, he felt unsure of his own judgment. He had built his empire on calculations, logic, and deals worth billions. But this maid had spent $200 in a way that shook his certainty more than any business loss ever could. Why would she do that? He whispered to himself. What does she get out of it? Mason entered, quietly handing him a file. Sir, about tomorrow's press event. Alexander waved him off. Cancel it. I want to visit that orphanage. Mason blinked. Excuse me, I said. Cancel it. Alexander repeated, his voice low but firm. Sometimes numbers are not enough. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the night sky. For the first time in a long while, the man who measured everything in profit and loss was beginning to wonder what kindness was truly worth. The next morning, the sky above Chicago was pale and calm, but Alexander's mind was far from it. He could not stop thinking about the way Lila had smiled at those children, how genuine it had been, how foreign it felt compared to the world he lived in. He drove himself to Street Agnes Orphanage, a quiet brick building that looked older than his entire company. For the first time in years, he walked into a place without an appointment, without cameras, without an audience. The air smelled of soup and crayons. Children ran down the hallway, their laughter bouncing off the walls. One of the nuns recognized him instantly, eyes widening. Mr. Grant. This is a surprise. He gave a polite nod. I am looking for a woman named Lila. I believe she volunteers here. Before the nun could answer, a voice came from the kitchen. Careful with that tray, Timmy. It is hot. Alexander turned and saw her, Lila, wearing a simple apron, stirring a pot of soup twice her size. Her hair was tied back, her cheeks flushed from the heat, and there was that same effortless joy that money could never buy. When she saw him, her smile faltered. Mr. Grant, what are you doing here? I wanted to see where my money went, he said quietly. Her eyes widened, unsure if he was teasing or serious. You mean the toys? The food? Yes, all of it. The children swarmed around him, tugging at his sleeves. Are you the man who sent the milk? One little girl asked. He hesitated, then nodded. I suppose I am. Their laughter filled the room again, and for the first time Alexander felt something warm break through his walls. When the children went outside to play, Lila wiped her hands and stood by the window. I know it was just a game for you, she said softly. A test. He looked at her, confused. Who told you that I overheard Mason last night? You were testing women to see who was greedy. Her tone was calm, but her eyes shimmered with hurt. I should not have taken part. I feel foolish now. Alexander felt a pang of guilt. He opened his mouth, then stopped. The truth sounded cruel even in his own head. I never meant to humiliate you, he said finally. I just stopped believing people could be kind without a reason. Lila smiled faintly, though her eyes were glassy. Then maybe it is time you start again. He watched her hand out bowls of soup to the children, laughing as they spilled half of it. Something inside him shifted, a crack in the wall he had built around his heart. On his way out, he left a check folded on the counter. When Lila found it later, she gasped. The amount was enough to rebuild the orphanage twice over. But at the bottom, one line made her eyes fill with tears. For the kids who made me believe again, AG. That night back at his penthouse, Alexander poured himself another drink but could not take a sip. The laughter from the orphanage still echoed in his ears. For the first time in years, he did not feel powerful. He felt small, human, and strangely at peace. Outside, the city buzzed with neon light, but inside, the billionaire who had tested love was slowly learning what love truly meant. 2 days later, the city woke to headlines about Alexander Grant's kindness experiment. Someone inside his company had leaked the footage. Clips of the 4 women spending his money were now everywhere, on television and gossip blogs on social media. The internet turned it into a circus. The billionaire's love test, one article said. Another headline read, "Meet the maid who outsmarted them all." By noon, reporters were camping outside the orphanage, shouting questions through the fence. Lila hid in the kitchen, trembling as camera flashes filled the windows. Sister Agnes, the head nun, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Child, you did nothing wrong." Lila shook her head. "But I did not want fame. I just wanted to help." Meanwhile, in his office, Alexander slammed a newspaper onto the desk. "Mason, find out who leaked it." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, it could have been one of the other women. They are furious. They think the maid made them look bad." Alexander clenched his jaw. "Of course they do." Within hours, the 3 women launched their own revenge. They appeared on a talk show pretending to be victims of Alexander's humiliation game. One cried fake tears, saying he made us compete for love. Another laughed bitterly. And that maid, she played innocent to win his heart. Social media exploded with mixed opinions. Some mocking Alexander, others praising Lila as an angel of kindness. It was chaos, and for the first time Alexander realized his arrogance had not just hurt himself, but had dragged an innocent woman into his mess. That evening he arrived at the orphanage again, this time without his bodyguards or luxury car. Lila was standing outside talking to reporters, her eyes red from exhaustion. When she saw him, she whispered under her breath, "Please just go home. This is already hard enough." He shook his head. "I will not leave you alone in this. You caused this," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I was part of your game, and now these children are scared because of me." He wanted to explain, but words felt useless. The cameras were still flashing, catching every expression. So he did the only thing that felt honest. He took off his expensive coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The crowd went silent for a moment. Then he said loud enough for the microphones to catch, "You are right. This was my fault. She was never part of the game. She was the only one who reminded me that kindness still exists." The reporters froze. The statement spread online within minutes. Some called it a redemption moment. Others said it was just another publicity act. But to Lila, it felt like truth for the first time. When the crowd finally left, she looked up at him with tears still clinging to her lashes. "Why did you come back?" "Because," he said quietly, "I wanted to apologize in person. And because I have never respected anyone more than I respect you right now." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Behind them, the orphanage lights glowed softly, and the children's laughter drifted through the night air. Lila exhaled slowly, as if releasing all the pain she had carried that week. "Respect is a good start," she said, smiling faintly. "But next time maybe try honesty first." Alexander laughed under his breath. "Fair enough." And in that small exchange something between them began to shift, not love yet, but the fragile beginning of trust. Viết phần 5 bám sát tài liệu content mẫu 2. TXT by Trump Token. Không viết trên Canvas. Tiếp nối phần 4 nhớ đồng nhất nhân vật và bối cảnh tuyến thời gian sao cho phù hợp. CS chú ý văn phong kỹ thuật viết trả lại kết quả để làm nội dung YouTube chứ không phải biên tập như đạo diễn. Nội dung không được viết tắt các từ mà phải viết đầy đủ để voiceover AI đọc tốt được. For the next few days the chaos slowly began to fade. The reporter stopped camping outside the orphanage and the online noise moved on to the next trending scandal. But the damage had already left its marks. Lila still walked with her head down, worried that people saw her as some kind of gold digger in disguise. Every time she tried to buy groceries or take the bus, someone would whisper, "That is her, the maid from the billionaire story." Alexander saw it all. He read the cruel comments online and the gossip headlines that twisted everything she stood for. Each word hit him harder than any financial loss ever could. He knew that his arrogance had turned an innocent woman into a public target, and he hated himself for it. One evening he showed up again at Street Agnes. This time he came carrying 2 boxes of pizza instead of flowers. The children ran toward him as if they had been waiting all day. "Mr. Grant, did you bring more milk?" one of them shouted. He laughed, handing out the pizza slices one by one. "No milk tonight, just cheese." When the children had eaten, he sat quietly at one of the old wooden tables, while Lila wiped the counters nearby. "I owe you more than an apology," he said softly. She turned around surprised. "You already apologized." "No," he said, shaking his head. "That was me trying to fix my image. This is me trying to fix myself." Lila studied his face for a long moment. There was no smugness now, no hint of the man who once played with people's emotions for sport. Just a tired man who looked like he was finally ready to listen. She smiled faintly. "So what are you planning to do, Mr. Grant?" He hesitated, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a set of papers. "I want to start a new foundation, a place that will support orphanages like this one across the country. I want you to lead it." Her eyes widened. "Me, I am not qualified for something like that." "You are more qualified than anyone I know," he said. "You actually care. And I trust you." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. She looked at the papers, then at him. "Why me? You could hire hundreds of people to do this." He smiled a little sheepish. "Because they would do it for the paycheck. You would do it for the children." Lila blinked back sudden tears. "You really mean this?" "I do," he said. "But only if you say yes." She laughed softly, half in disbelief. "Then yes, I will do it. But only if you promise one thing." "What is that?" "Never test people again. Trust them first, and let them prove you right." He nodded almost solemnly. "Deal." In the weeks that followed, the new foundation began to take shape. Lila spent her days organizing charity drives and visiting shelters. Alexander joined her more often than he admitted to his board. He helped paint walls, serve food, and read bedtime stories to the children who now called him Uncle Alex. Every evening they ended up laughing over small things like how he could never fold a blanket straight, or how she burned toast every time she got distracted. Little by little the walls between them crumbled. He stopped seeing her as the maid and started seeing her as the compass he never knew he needed. She stopped seeing him as the billionaire who tested her, and started seeing the man who stayed when the cameras were gone. One night, as they finished cleaning up after a fundraising dinner, Lila looked at him and said, "You know, Mr. Grant, you are terrible at pretending to be a serious businessman when you smile like that." He chuckled. "And you are terrible at pretending you do not enjoy making fun of me." She laughed, covering her mouth. "Maybe I do." Their laughter filled the hall, soft and real, and for the first time it felt like something new had begun. Neither of them said the word love, but it was there in every shared glance, in every joke, in every quiet act of kindness. As Alexander locked the doors that night, he realized something simple yet profound. He had spent his life testing people's worth through money, but the woman who changed him never wanted a dime. She only wanted to make the world a little kinder. And somehow in helping her do that, he had finally learned how to live. Weeks turned into months, and the foundation grew faster than anyone expected. News outlets began to call it the Grace Project, a quiet empire of compassion that reached orphanages and shelters across the country. Every week, Alexander and Lila worked side by side, sometimes arguing about logistics, sometimes laughing over coffee, always learning more about each other. The once arrogant billionaire who used to measure time and profit now found himself measuring it in smiles. One afternoon, they were preparing for a charity gala, an event meant to introduce their next expansion project. The grand ballroom was filled with lights, music, and guests dressed in their finest. Lila, in a simple pastel dress, looked completely out of place among the sparkling gowns, yet somehow she drew every gaze in the room. When Alexander saw her step through the doors, he nearly forgot his speech. For a man who had spoken before presidents and investors, his palms had never been this sweaty. "Relax, Mr. Grant," she teased quietly as she reached him. "You look like someone who forgot his lines." He laughed nervously. "I might have. You look amazing." Her cheeks flushed a little and she whispered, "Just do not call me the maid tonight." He grinned. Never again. The evening went perfectly until the three women from his past showed up. They had come uninvited, dressed to kill and ready for trouble. One of them, the influencer, approached the stage while Alexander was giving his speech. Her voice cut through the music like a blade. "Tell them, Alex, was this your redemption or your next game?" The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed, the room filled with whispers. Lila froze beside the stage, her heart pounding. Alexander straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the woman. "No game this time," he said firmly. "This is what real change looks like. You are welcome to stay and watch if you can handle it." The crowd broke into applause, drowning out the jealous laughter that followed. After the gala ended, Lila found him outside on the terrace, leaning against the railing. The city lights glowed below, and the sound of the wind softened the tension between them. She walked over quietly. "You handled that well." He smiled faintly. "I deserved that interruption. I made my bed a long time ago." She shook her head. "Maybe. But tonight you showed them you are not the same man anymore." Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his chest shifted again. He realized that every wall he had built was already gone. "You have no idea how much you have changed me," he said quietly. "I do not even recognize the man I was." Lila smiled, her voice gentle. "Then do not go back to him." For a long moment they stood in silence, watching the lights flicker over the skyline. Finally, Alexander said, "Lila, can I tell you something honest?" She laughed softly. "You can try." He hesitated, then said, "I used to think kindness was weakness. But now I see it as the only thing that makes life worth living." Her eyes softened. "That is the kind of truth people spend their whole lives trying to find." The wind picked up, blowing a strand of hair across her face. Without thinking, he reached out and tucked it behind her ear. She blinked, surprised, then smiled a small, quiet smile that said everything words could not. Somewhere behind them, music drifted from the ballroom again, but neither of them moved. For the first time since his test began, Alexander was not thinking about the past or his mistakes. He was simply standing there next to the woman who had taught him what love could be. And in that still moment above the city, it felt like the world itself had paused to listen. The night after the gala felt quieter than usual. For once, Alexander did not go back to his penthouse. Instead, he stayed late at the foundation's office, staring at a wall filled with photos of smiling children, rebuilt playgrounds, and small communities they had helped. Every picture had one common thread: Lila was in all of them. Sometimes laughing, sometimes covered in paint, sometimes holding a child's hand. She was not just part of the project. She was the heart of it. When she entered the office that night, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate instead of coffee, he smiled faintly. "Do you ever rest?" she asked, handing him a cup. He chuckled. "Not really. You?" She sat beside him, taking in the wall of photos. "I do not feel tired when it is for them." They sat in silence for a moment, the city lights glowing through the glass windows. Finally, Alexander spoke, his voice low. You know, I used to think helping others was just a good PR move. But this feels different. Lila looked at him with that calm honesty that always disarmed him. It is different because this time it is real. You are not doing it for a headline. He nodded slowly. You were right that night at the orphanage. I did not know what kindness meant. I was afraid of it. She smiled softly. You were afraid of being hurt again. That is not weakness. He met her eyes. And you were never afraid to care even when people laughed at you. That is what makes you strong. For a while they just looked at each other, a quiet understanding between them that did not need words. Then Lila stood up, walking toward the window. You know, when I was a kid at street, Agnes, I used to stare at this city and think, someday I will build something that matters. I never imagined I would do it with someone like you. Alexander walked closer, stopping beside her. Someone like me, she laughed softly. A billionaire who burns toast and does not know how to fold blankets. He laughed, shaking his head. Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and slow, brushing against the glass. Lila pressed her hand against the window. The first snow always feels like a new beginning. Alexander looked at her hand and without hesitation placed his own over it. Then maybe this is ours, he said quietly. She turned toward him, surprised by the tenderness in his voice. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. It was Mason, his assistant. Sir, the board wants to discuss your decision to fund more orphanages. They think it is a financial risk. Alexander sighed. Tell them it is a risk worth taking. Lila watched him end the call, her expression unreadable. You are really doing it, huh? He smiled. Yes. I spent half my life building empires for profit. It is time to build something for people. The snow outside thickened and the world seemed to grow quieter. Lila looked at him again, this time with a mix of gratitude and warmth. You know, Alexander, for a man who once tested love, you are finally passing your own test. He laughed under his breath. Maybe I had a good teacher. Their eyes met and something unspoken settled between them, something fragile but strong enough to carry them forward. As the snow fell harder outside, Alexander felt certain of one thing. He had started a test to expose greed, but he had ended up discovering grace. And standing there beside Lila, he finally understood that love was never about passing or failing. It was about learning, forgiving, and choosing to stay. A few weeks later, winter wrapped Chicago in silver light. The city streets were quiet under a blanket of snow, and the foundation buzzed with preparations for the holiday charity event. It was the biggest one yet, an evening meant to raise funds for building new homes for orphans across the country. Inside the main hall, laughter echoed as volunteers decorated trees and wrapped gifts. Lila moved from table to table, checking details and fixing ribbons that had gone loose. She wore a red sweater dotted with paint stains, and her hair was tied up in a messy bun. To everyone else, she was the heart of the celebration. But beneath her calm smile, something stirred. She had begun to feel something deeper for Alexander, something she could not name without fear of ruining what they had built. Alexander arrived late, brushing snow from his coat. When he saw her laughing with the children, his chest tightened in a way that was no longer foreign. Mason walked beside him, holding a clipboard. Sir, everything is ready for the event, he said. You are expected to make your announcement in 20 minutes. Alexander nodded absently, his eyes never leaving Lila. Good. Make sure she stays near the stage. When the guests arrived, the hall filled with music and light. Cameras flashed as donors greeted Alexander, praising his transformation from ruthless businessman to philanthropist. But for him, the real moment was yet to come. He had planned a surprise, a new initiative that would change Lila's life forever. The program began. Lila gave a short speech, first, her voice warm and steady. Every child deserves a safe place to call home. That is what this foundation is truly about. Not money, not fame, just love. Her sincerity silenced the crowd. Even the most stoic investors felt something move in their hearts. Then Alexander stepped forward. "Thank you, Lila," he said, his voice carrying through the microphone. "Tonight I want to announce a new branch of our foundation. It will be called Lila's Home Project, a program that will ensure no child in this country grows up without family or education." The audience burst into applause. Lila turned toward him stunned. "You named it after me." He smiled. "You inspired it. You changed how I see everything." Her eyes filled with tears and she whispered, "Alexander, you did not have to." "I wanted to," he said gently, "because none of this would exist without you." But before the applause could fade, a familiar voice rang out from the back of the hall. It was one of the women from the past, the heiress standing near the doorway with a cruel smile. "So this is how you make up for your sins, Alex. Giving everything to the maid who fooled you." Gasps filled the room. Cameras turned. The moment cracked like glass. Lila froze, embarrassment flooding her face. She tried to speak, but Alexander stepped forward first. "Enough," he said firmly. "Lila never fooled anyone. She is the reason this foundation exists, and she is the reason I found something worth believing in again." The crowd fell silent. The heiress glared at him, then turned and stormed out. Alexander turned back to Lila, lowering his voice. "I am sorry you had to go through that again." She shook her head, still trembling. "I do not care what she said. I just never expected all this." He smiled softly. "Then you will not expect the next part either." The lights dimmed slightly as he reached into his pocket. Lila's eyes widened when she saw the small velvet box in his hand. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He took a breath, his heart pounding. "You once told me to trust people first and let them prove me right. So I am trusting you now with everything I am." The hall was silent as he opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant and understated, just like her. "Lila," he said, his voice steady, "will you marry me?" The room erupted in gasps and applause, but in that moment it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. The man who had once tested love, and the woman who had taught him its true meaning. For a long, breathless moment the world seemed to stop. Lila stared at the ring in Alexander's hand, her eyes wide, her heart pounding loud enough that she could barely hear the applause around her. Every memory, the test, the humiliation, the laughter of the children, and the long nights at the foundation flashed before her all at once. This man who had once treated love like a game was now kneeling before her with nothing but honesty in his eyes. She covered her mouth, trying to hold back a laugh and a tear at the same time. "Alexander," she whispered, "you are proposing in front of 200 people. What if I say no?" He smiled, his voice soft but full of warmth. "Then I will keep asking until you say yes." The crowd chuckled, and so did she, shaking her head in disbelief. Her heart softened completely as she whispered, "Yes. Of course, yes." The room erupted in cheers. Confetti filled the air as the orchestra began to play. Children from the orphanage ran onto the stage, hugging her legs and shouting. She said yes. Alexander stood, slipping the ring onto her finger with a tenderness that silenced everything else. For the first time in his life, he was not thinking about power, money, or success. He was thinking about a future built on kindness, laughter, and second chances. After the event, they stepped outside into the snow. The world felt peaceful again, the air crisp and clear. Lila looked up at the falling snowflakes and laughed. "Do you realize that every big moment in our story seems to happen when it snows?" Alexander smiled. "Maybe snow is our good luck charm." She grinned, tilting her head. "Or maybe it is just the universe telling you to slow down." He laughed quietly. "Then I guess I will never rush again." They walked down the steps together, past the glowing Christmas lights that lined the street. At the bottom of the stairs, one of the children ran up and handed Lila a small drawing. It was a picture of a big house, surrounded by smiling faces, children, volunteers, and at the center, Lila and Alexander holding hands. "The child," said Miss Lila, "I drew your new home." Tears welled in her eyes as she knelt down and hugged the child tightly. "It is beautiful. Thank you." Alexander watched the scene, his heart swelling. He had spent a lifetime chasing numbers and building empires, but this was what real wealth looked like. As Lila stood and slipped her arm through his, he whispered, "You have no idea how much you changed me." She smiled softly. "Maybe I did not change you. Maybe I just reminded you who you were meant to be." They walked away, their footsteps vanishing into the snow. Behind them, the Foundation's banner swayed gently in the winter breeze, the words "Lila's Home Project" glowing under the lights. Voiceover. Sometimes, life tests us in the cruelest ways, only to show us the kindest truths. Alexander Grant started a game to test love, but he found something greater than he ever imagined: a woman who turned his pride into purpose and his fortune into faith. Because in the end, love is not about what you can buy, but about what you choose to give. The camera of life faded on the two of them walking hand in hand, snowflakes catching in their hair, their laughter echoing softly into the night, proof that even the coldest hearts can find warmth again if they are brave enough to open the door.